This is the Blackout Podcast.
Welcome to the Blackout Podcast, where I get to talk to amazing people doing amazing things. And I'm super lucky and happy to have my friend Jackie Torrens here. I have a narrative film background, and watching your films have actually inspired me, and I think I'm slowly getting to making documentaries. I think, with narrative, you have all this control. What do people say, how you light it, where we shoot, what time of day, all that stuff. But with documentaries, it's more organic.
Well, it's different, isn't
Right.
it? Hi, by the way. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on. Well, I actually come from the world of fiction storytelling. I started in fiction storytelling way before I got into documentary.
Yeah.
Documentary filmmaking, I've only been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. Documentary, I've only been doing for the last 10 years. The first 4 years of my documentary work was in radio documentary, which I still love. And then basically for the last 5 years, I've been in documentary film and have done about 6 films in that time, and we'll be starting my 7th. But before that, I started in poetry. I was only ever going to be a poet. And then I did fiction storytelling. And then by accident, I started writing for theater. And when I started writing for theater, I started really also by accident acting in theater. And that led to me being asked and also looking for more opportunities to write and act in television and film. And I'm basically just a gal who can't say no when it comes to story. So I'll say yes in whatever form it wants to come to me.
Oh, my introduction sucks. Well, so thanks for doing that. Okay, well, so the one I saw that actually gripped me was, all of them are gripping, but the one I saw, the most recent one I saw was My Week on Welfare. Is that what it's called?
Yes, yeah.
And I saw it, it was at the library, and it was an event where, would see the film, then there was a talk after, right? And it turns out it was a talk about the people actually on welfare, just talking about their experience. And I'm Nigerian, right? And I moved to Canada, and Canada, it's bright and shiny, and it's great, and it's actually changed my life, right? But there are things that we really don't talk about, and I think that was the beauty of that documentary for me, because I remember, I can't say word for word, but there was a scene, I think it was like day 3 or 4, and you had just 4 slices of bread left, and then you had to bring, so this is for breakfast, and this is for, it was heartbreaking. I mean, it was powerful, and it was heartbreaking at the same time.
That's excellent. I can jump right in there with a number of things. I don't think in Nigeria, they don't talk about when people need help or assistance, financial assistance, and we're not good talking about it here either. And so My Week on Welfare was a documentary that I did through my company, Peep Media. It's me and producer Jessica Brown. We're based here in Halifax. We've been formed since 2012. She is a producer who had about 15 years experience in the industry before we started working together, and then we were hired to work on a gig together. We enjoyed working together so much we formed a company in 2012. And our first documentary was a documentary film called Edge of East, which was examining kind of offbeat East Coast subcultures. And our second documentary was a documentary film called My Week on Welfare. And that came about, the concept for that came about was that I would spend a week living with 2 different Nova Scotians who are currently living on income assistance. And I wanted to pick 2 people who, one might be the kind of person you might expect to be on welfare, and one would be the kind of person
Surprise.
you wouldn't expect to be on welfare.
Yep.
And both of them defied all the stereotypes. So I think what allowed me to be able to do that and kind of have people on the system trust me, because it's one thing, when we were looking for people who would allow me to live with them and have a camera crew come into their home and to tell the world essentially I'm on income assistance, that takes a really special kind of person. And I think one of the ways we were able to do that was I myself had been on income assistance. I was a teenage welfare mother. I'd actually come from a middle class, white middle class home, and having a baby as a teenager was not supposed to be part of my demographic story. And I got knocked up as a teen and had my kid and needed a way to feed my kid while I was going back to school. And so we were on the system for about 3 years, and it was such a shock to be on welfare. I think the very first person's stereotypes I had to overcome about what kind of person goes on welfare were my own, because I was shocked to find myself there, and ashamed to find myself there, and embarrassed to find myself there, and didn't know at the time that, of course, the majority of people who find themselves on income assistance are just, of course, regular people who've been caught in a combination of circumstance. But we, as a society, and government forms policy, we have this idea that anybody who's on welfare, it's because there's a moral flaw in their character. They're a person who makes bad decisions, or they're trying to scam the system, which is actually... I can go on all sorts of bents about income assistance. 3% of the people nationwide who are on income assistance actually commit welfare fraud. 22% of the people don't declare goods when they go across the border. So in terms of the big boogeyman of welfare fraud, it's actually very small. So I knew my own background of being on the system and what I had learned about that. It was an incredibly formative experience for me about how you're treated in society when you're perceived to be someone who's the lowest of the low.
Yeah.
It's quite eye-opening, especially how you're treated by people who you think are going to be your allies. Like, I encountered systematic abuse in all sorts of places, in the education system, in the legal system, in the medical system, simply because I was on welfare and people thought they could treat me a certain way. So when we were doing this documentary, I felt that my experience meant that we kind of had a very singular in to be able to go to people who are currently on the system and say, we want to do a film that actually it talks about the reality of the actual reality of what it's like to live on welfare versus the stereotypes. And I'm someone myself who was on the system, so I'm not coming at it from any distance. I'm not kind of, and I'm not kind of poverty slumming. Like I've been there and I know the reality. So these were people the people who agreed to be in the film were incredibly courageous, incredibly generous people who really took a leap of faith with me. And that film has played so many different places and so many different institutions. Like the social work school uses it, the legal aid school uses it. And the people who were in the film have often gone and done, they've gone to the screenings and they've done question and answer periods afterwards. And there's a local low-income group in the province called Benefits Reform Action Society. You can find them on Facebook. They're under Benefits Reform Action Society, or BRAG for short. They're also on Twitter. And they've now been using the film for the last couple of years where they'll set up public screenings for free. And then afterwards, they will have a first voice panel. So people from the horse's mouth, so to speak, people who, instead of politicians talking about them or any one of us who think what people on welfare should do to get their lives together, it's actually the people, first voice people talking about what these policies mean for the reality of their lives. So, and that's amazing, because that's to have your work be used and affect people, and people want to see it, and then they can also use it to try and make other people understand something they haven't understood before. What more could one possibly want as a storyteller, right?
It is super powerful, and it was actually a brag event that I went to, and the person that has 2 master's degrees, I can't remember his name right now, but he was in your film. He did a talk right after.
Aaron Spidel, that's right.
Yeah, him. Yeah, he did a talk right after that was shocking. You wanna, what are my taxes really doing? When you hear the stories, that's what I kept thinking. It was shocking. It felt, if someone decides to go, if someone gets to the point where they feel this is the best option for me, they wouldn't be what I like how you use the puppets to tell the story of what people think. Oh, they are just gambling or spending it on drugs and stuff like this. Someone like that, actually, there was a line he said. Actually, you asked him. He was talking about his medicine, right? Because he has some kind of subsidies
Well,
on some.
I wanted Aaron to be in the film because he's a white, middle-aged, educated man. He's the demographic you wouldn't expect to be on welfare, and he's on welfare.
Yeah.
Now, he's also disabled, so that's the other thing that we don't know about the reality of who's on welfare. So often when we're picking on welfare people, we're picking on single parents, largely women,
Yeah.
who are raising their kids and getting no support, and we're picking on the disabled population because that's who's on income assistance. And so in Aaron's case, he has a number of medications he has to have every month. Some are covered and some are not. He has $4 a day in which to feed himself. So he's put in a situation, as many people on income assistance are, when it comes to paying for medication,
Yeah.
you have to pay a medication roulette.
Yeah.
That's probably the line you were
That
thinking
is
of,
it.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
how am I feeling and what medication can I afford to get filled, because there's a whole bunch I can't afford to get filled.
Yeah.
And so and our need to punish people on welfare, and I think we need to punish them because we need to believe it could never happen to us. So I need to believe it's your fault and it's something you did. And our government policy reflects that. We punish people on income assistance. And the reality is it costs in Nova Scotia $2.5 billion a year to keep punitive policies in place that punish people as opposed to help them. So someone like Aaron, he actually costs the healthcare system more because he can't get the medications he needs each month. He then has health effects that periodically put him in the hospital. He has to take an ambulance. That actually costs us more than if we just got the man's medications filled.
Right. And then another one that was shocking to me was finding out that you don't get a bus pass if you don't see your doctor 9 times or something. Like unreasonable number a month, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking, how sick do you have to be to see a doctor 9 times a month? And we don't really have doctors here, right? So I'm not gonna get a bus pass if I don't see a doctor, I think 9 times a month. And I'm
Or if I get that bus pass, I have to take it out of my food money. Bus pass is like $80 a month or something, right? You're living on $4 a day for 3 meals. And it's not just that, the barriers in terms of transportation and healthcare. Of course, it's the barriers to education. The other person in the film, Cherise Higgins, an
Yeah.
amazing young woman
Yeah.
who took Department of Community Services to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia to get her right reinstated to go back to school, to make a better life for her and her child. She was amazing. She heard we were looking for people, and she called us up and said, "You're going to want to come talk to me."
It's just super interesting.
Super
I like,
interesting.
you went to school and I think she graduated.
She did graduate.
Yeah. Oh man, that yeah. Like, I can talk about, I can have a podcast just talking about my week on welfare. It was super interesting. And then I saw clips of one where you went to talk to people that that have seen aliens in.
Oh, yes. So you're talking about Edge of East. All the films, by the way, are online. Edge of East and Week on Welfare and Small Town Showbiz were all done for CBC. So if you Google their names and CBC, you can get to the CBC Media player and watch them. So Edge of East was our very first documentary film that Peep Media did, Jessica Brown and I.
Yeah.
And so I love things that are off the beaten path. I love intriguing visuals, and I like talking to people who believe different things than myself. I don't need to believe what you believe, but I'm very interested in why you believe what you believe.
Yeah.
And so because this was being done, Edge of East was being done for CBC Maritimes, it had to sort of have a regional focus. So we said, we'll look at 3 groups that exist here in the Maritimes that are different from your standard, what we call fiddles and fish, right? Where it's sort of that, it seems like there are cliches of the East Coast Maritime story, and fiddles and fish dominate a lot of it. But we're more than that. And so Edge of East talked to 3 different groups. One was a group of steampunks who exist in Halifax, and those are people who kind of have a past and futuristic aesthetic. Another group was yodelers. There's actually yodelers in this province, and they are a distinct style of yodeling. Nova Scotia has a distinct style of yodeling that blends Swiss yodeling and country yodeling, and that came from a Nova Scotia yodeler called Wilf Carter. And so there is a group of, they're farming people. They're inland Nova Scotian people who farm, who have a yodeling culture. And I wanted to I love that sound. Yodeling to me sounds like an animal howl, and I love any art form. This art form in particular devotes itself to going for the crack in the voice, the flaw, the thing that singers mostly are trying to avoid. So for me, it was really intriguing to spend time with people whose art form is devoted to the imperfection. And then the third group of people that we looked at was the community of Shag Harbor, which is a really unique Nova Scotia community. They believe they were visited by a UFO in 1967, I believe. It's still actually the only official UFO sighting on national government books. And this whole very singular small community down at the tip of our province hangs its hat on that mythology. That is the thing that makes this community unique. And at the same time, it's mixed with a real maritime pragmatism. So everyone in that town has a story about that UFO. Everybody's mother or cousin or whoever has seen it. And they'll tell it to you. They don't tell it to you. They don't talk to you about that story in any sort of mystical kind of way. It's as pragmatic as, if they were going to talk to you about the time they went to the store to get, their groceries or something. So I was really intrigued by that community and why they had sort of hung their hat on this particular UFO story, which actually reminded me of a faith. In the end, I thought UFO belief is not unlike a belief in a particular religion. There's enough to intrigue you, a little bit of truth, and then the rest you kind of have to take on faith.
Yeah, the one with the spaceship people was interesting, and and then I think after that one was what was the next one after? Was Burning Langille? Did you do Burning
Langille? Our third documentary was for Peep was a small town showbiz, and that
oh my god, that lady with the whip, and you know what? I don't know. Do
you want me to set up what it was?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Yes.
so Small Town Showbiz was actually a character sketch about two people who live here in the Maritimes with showbiz dreams, essentially. And one is a woman named Diana Hart, who's in her 50s, who's a pinup model who began pinup modeling very late in life in her 40s and acting and pursuing those dreams. And one is a man named Jackie Smith who lives in Dartmouth, who wanted to be a rock singer and is the lead singer of a band named Razor Boy, and has had a journey with that band that has kind of spanned 3 decades. And I just kind of wanted to look at, because I think kind of in most everybody, there's some form of a showbiz dream that beats in our hearts, and not many of us have the courage to pursue that. And there's many of us living, not everyone lives in New York City or London and Paris, right? Most of us in this world are living in rural or small places, and we've all got our showbiz dreams. So I wanted to examine the nature of that and the nature of making meaning.
I remember, but you know what? There's a contrast with each of those characters, right? With Razor Boy, he was really on this trajectory that was kind of going up, and then he went down.
He was going for fame.
Yeah.
The band was poised to, reach that next level.
And then and then on the other side, there's this story with his family also, and then with the lady, she's kind of following her dream. She's actually known everywhere, especially her pin-up career, right? But on the other hand, there's also this story with her family.
Yeah, she has a disabled son. He's quite severely disabled, Mitchell. I think he's 28 years old now, but he will always be a baby mentally. Yeah. And physically, she takes care of him as if he was a baby. He has diapers she has to change. She literally has to spoon feed him. Yeah. And Diana, when I first saw Diana, she's beautiful in this kind of unreal, almost Barbie-like way, like peroxide blonde and very curvy and buxom and likes, kind of tiny outfits. And you look at her, and same with Jackie. But when I saw them both, what what of course struck me at first was their visuals, right? He had such a rock star look, and she had such a pin-up look.
Yeah.
And then as I got to know them more, of course, you get to know the real human behind. We all have a persona, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
all have an identity that we're throwing out there. And then there's the real story of the real human behind that. And so for Diana, it's really important for her to express herself creatively, especially given the life that she has. It's her ability to kind of make her fantasies come true is what gives her the fuel to be the amazing person she actually is in her exceptionally challenging real life.
Oh man, it is. And man, I don't. I watched that one. I actually remember it because I saw it at a festival, and I'm thinking, how do you even find these people? That's what came to mind because you're right. We have who people know us and who we might be, but there's not that much of a distinct difference between if you really get to know the person. There's not that much of a difference. But these characters, you always find out there's like so much depth. I can't even imagine she's done that for almost 30 years now. Like I can't, I don't have kids, so I mean, I guess my mom loves me. No, I guess my mom she loves me, but it's just man.
Yeah, I don't know either. Like, I do have a kid. My kid's an adult now because I had my kid when I was a kid. But and one of the things that's really the most challenging thing about parenthood is it ain't about you at all. It's a role of sacrifice, right? Like, you are not the priority. Starting with pregnancy, I remember when I was pregnant, I was never going to have kids, and I remember being kind of blown away by the physical changes in my body. And I remember reading that if you don't drink enough calcium, your own body will leach the calcium from your teeth to give it to the fetus.
Wow.
And that kind of blew my mind of like, wow, for the first time in my life, my own body's priority, number one priority,
Someone
isn't
else.
me.
Yeah.
That's a very singular situation to find
Holy
yourself in.
smokes.
And it kind of sets up what the parent-child
The rest of
relationship
your
is,
life.
right? And in Diana's case, I mean, I'm always going to be a parent to my child,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whatever he needs and however I can help him, I'm always going to be there for him. But he's an adult and has his own life. Diana Mitchell, who she loves deeply, she's an amazing mother to, that's her baby forever. And that is a particular circumstance that, yeah, I don't know how I would find the grace and strength to deal with.
No.
But her creative expression, to me, what I observed was her creative expression and her bravery to do that. There's so many of us who want to express ourselves creatively, and we don't because we're not brave enough to, right? And Diana gets a lot of attention, some of it good and some of it bad. What are you doing dressing like that? Someone your age or anyone, whatever. So it actually takes bravery to express yourself in whatever way it is you want to express yourself. But that is the thing that gives her strength to live the life she's living. So that's the importance of creativity and making meaning for yourself.
Yeah, and the other thing that actually gets me about your film is how long do you spend with them to talk to you? Like, how long does it take from, hi, I'm Jackie, to, oh, by the way, my auntie did this to me?
Yeah.
How do you form that
Well, it
relationship?
depends in terms of how I find people. Sometimes, like with Edge of East, to me, the subject came first. So I actually had a huge love of yodeling, and the more I investigated yodeling, that's when I stumbled upon, well, one, Wilf Carter, a big formative Nova Scotia yodeler who just was an amazing artist and poet, and who kind of birthed a generation of Nova Scotia yodelers. And so my interest in yodeling led to finding the individuals who practice this art form in this province. In the case of Jackie and Diana for Small Town Showbiz, I actually saw them on social media, and the first thing, their visuals are so distinct that's the first thing that I was struck by. And then I basically, was following them. I was creeping them to kind of see who they were in their life. And then I did what I usually do with people, which is, at a certain point when I want to make contact, if I have in my gut a feeling of, I think there's a person with a story here that intrigues me, I call them up and I say, I'm Jackie and I make stories and I heard about this. Would you come have coffee with me? And no one said no to me yet, which is awesome. But also, I think it's so rare that that we see one another, right? And that people ask questions of one another. I'm a very curious person. One way I've been able to make my way in this world is through trying to figure out others and asking them about themselves and asking them the story of them. It helps me, it informs me, it educates me, you know. But I think generally we don't ask each other a lot of questions, and we don't actually see one another in a way where there's a profound connection there. And so if I've called you up and you've been kind enough to come have coffee with me and we're having a real conversation, I'm sincere in my interest in you and your story.
But then from that coffee conversation and the coffee meeting, how long does it take to get that level of trust? Because the level of trust you develop with these people,
trust.
I think whatever happens after the film is made, you can always call them up. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Because the things they reveal to
and
you,
it's interesting because afterwards, actually, like I still have, most of the people I've done stories on are still in my life in some way. And I actually leave that up to them. I kind of feel like I do prepare it, like I'll be in your life for an intense period of time and then I'll be gone. But a lot of times, if someone wants to maintain contact, I feel so fortunate that they want to maintain contact. But I do leave it up to them. In terms of that trust thing, it's a thing, isn't it? Because I've had situations where, I've done also a couple of documentaries for a company here called Telltale, and that's a little different. The idea has come from, I've worked with Ed Pyle, who owns the company, and Aaron Oakes, who's the producer, who has come up with the ideas for the documentaries I've done for Telltale. So the idea hasn't originated from me, and they found the documentary participants. So then I kind of come in later in the game and meet the documentary participant, and I have less time than I normally would on a Peep Media project to set up a relationship, and it hasn't been kind of instigated by me. So it's a different kind of thing. But you still have to form a relationship, and you must have trust. You must. Otherwise you won't get anything authentic. So in the case of I guess it's how you communicate, and I also really believe in being very upfront with people, right? Like when I was talking to the UFO believers for Edge of East, I didn't pretend I believed in UFOs, right? I was like, I don't know, and actually that whether there are UFOs or not has never been kind of a question that has been on my mind, but I'm intrigued by the fact that you believe that. Can you talk to me about why you believe that? And same with Week on Welfare. The advantage again was, I've been on the system myself. I know what that's like. And with Small Town Showbiz with Jackie and Diana, the other thing was, hey, I live in a small town and I'm in the arts myself. Like I'm doing the same thing you're doing. With Bernie Langille, which is Peep Media's fourth film, Bernie Langille Wants to Know Who Killed Bernie Langille.
Yeah, I mean, let's pause first. How did you come up with that title? Look, titling, people that don't make films don't understand how important it is. In fact, if you create anything, the title, what you name that thing matters, right?
It does.
How did you come up with that title? I remember seeing that title, like, oh my gosh, she did it again. Oh, no. How did you come up with that title?
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. It just kind of made sense. So essentially the background of the story is, so I'm on Twitter one night. This is how I ended up meeting Bernie Langille. I'm on Twitter one night, which I actually am not on that much, and I have no skill with it either. Some people do, I don't. And all of a sudden, this man, I don't even know how I found his feed, but essentially his name was Bernie Langille, and he said, I'm just going to tweet out this story. My family's been living with this story for 50 years. I am named after my grandfather, Bernard Langille. I never met him. He died 15 years before I was born. He died in 1968 under these weird circumstances. And all of a sudden, in a series of tweets, comes out this story of this strange, odd death of his grandfather. And I called him up and I said, I'm Jackie and I tell stories, and would you come have coffee with me? And he did. And then we started working on making it a documentary short, which it exists as now as an 18-minute documentary short.
That's killed it everywhere, by the way. I don't know. You know what?
Oh, thank
that's
you so much.
another thing about you is that you're super humble. Because if I even made a film that was that good, I'll be in people's face like, oh yeah, you know, I played at hot dogs, I played at this, I played at... Like, it's played everywhere.
Oh, that's awesome, Israel.
Hey,
Thank
wait,
you.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, that's me. That's not you. But, yeah, so,
You made some good films, though. I've watched your films.
So Bernie Langille has been super successful.
Well, yeah, and so the title just came from, it just seemed to make sense. It seemed like it would be an intriguing title, and it is what it is, right? Bernie Langille does want to know who killed Bernie Langille. So so the titles work well for us, and it did premiere last year at Hot Docs, and then it's been on the Film Fest circuit and was chosen by Telefilm, actually, to be one of 10 films from Canada to represent the country at Clermont-Ferrand.
What?
And,
How was that one, though?
We didn't go to that one because we were shooting additional. I was shooting additional material for Bernie Langille because we were going to make it into a feature. So we couldn't go because of that.
Clermont-Ferrand. But by the way, if the short did this well, people are just gonna eat the feature up because
I hope so.
I have no doubts. Have you seen? Okay, of course you've seen the film. I was just about to ask you, have you seen the film?
No. But I think one of the things that makes the film, I think my background in fiction, we started out kind of talking about where I came from, and I didn't start in documentary. I started in the world of fiction. Yeah. And so I think that always affects how I tell stories in documentary. I think it's a good thing that I've come from the world of fiction. So in 2012, I'd actually done a radio documentary about a group of artists who create in miniature, in dollhouse scale. So, and when I saw their work, I thought, I want to tell a documentary story where I use miniature worlds for the documentary reenactments. And so I had been looking for a particular story, and I knew I wanted it to be a subversive story that was kind of dark. And so when I met with Bernie Langille, who was trying to figure out from the fog of family narrative the truth about a story he'd grown up with, which was essentially a dark family fairy tale. Yeah. I thought, this is the story in which to use that concept. So I called up 3 of the artists who had been in my documentary about artists who create in miniature. And I said, would you like to make the miniature sets for this documentary I'm working on about this man who died in 1968. So that is one of the film has kind of been singled out for that concept. And that was, there was a point, because for 5 years I was trying to make that concept happen. And there was a point where I thought, I may not be able to do this idea. And ideas, you get, there's more than one idea out there. But this idea in particular, I thought, something in my heart is just going to ache if I don't get a chance to explore this idea. So I feel really fortunate that we've had a chance to do it in an 18-minute version and that it's gone over as well as it has. And I feel really fortunate to be able to explore the idea further in a longer piece, for sure.
I didn't know it was 18 minutes. And that's the key to me of a good film. A good story is you don't notice the time pass.
Yeah, hopefully. If you notice the time pass.
It's like, oh my God, yeah. yeah, I didn't know it was 18 minutes. I thought it was 9. I really thought it was 9.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
It was a difficult story to tell in 18 minutes. I'm looking forward to having more time because it's an extremely complicated story. It's a crazy story.
Yeah. That's my question. So there's you have so many folds. So there's the one about getting people to open up, and there's the one about getting agencies and organizations to open up. Because you got all these documents. Was that all Bernie, or did you also do some digging yourself?
Right. So essentially, in long strokes, so his grandfather falls down the stairs one night in 1968, and then after that, even more bizarre set of circumstances take place where he is electrician engineer with the military. He works on the base of CFB Gagetown, and after he falls down the stairs, he's taken to a military hospital where the doctor in charge assaults him and says, "You're going to die today, Langille." That's actually documented. After that happens, there's a delay in getting him air evacuation. He's listed as critical condition, and there's a 5-hour delay in getting him transported by air to Halifax. Once he lands in Halifax, he's leaving Shearwater, and the ambulance goes over a set of train tracks, and it's crashed into by a train. And this man dies about 24 hours after that with only military people present in the room. So one of the sons of this man, Bernard Langille, he had 3 sons, and one of the sons was named Larry, and he basically lived a life where he was obsessed with the case, and he collected all the documentation he could, and he discovered that soon after Bernard Langille died, there were 2 military boards of inquiry. So there's documentation from that. There's documentation from the medical examiner's records. There's documentation from legal papers from when the family tried to find legal justice in the 80s. So the thing that was, and the documentation is important because you hear kind of the broad strokes of the story and you go, that's crazy. Can that possibly be? Even though Bernie Langille Jr., who is the person now trying to find out what happened to his grandfather, an extremely credible person. But the story feels crazy. And then you see the documentation and you actually see in black and white the testimony of the doctor actually saying, I assaulted him and I said this. And it lends important credibility to the story.
Yeah. I mean, no. I'm happy that I remember when we met, I said it has to be a feature. Yeah, you did the whole Jackie Torrens thing. Yeah, it would be nice. We're working on it. So I'm happy it's going to happen.
Thanks,
I'm so happy.
Thank you. That's kind.
And, okay, so that's Bernard Langille. Now, you're Hamlet, too.
I did just play Hamlet in January. Yeah. So, which was great. I'd never actually ever thought about playing Hamlet because... well, probably for the most part because, someone like me is not supposed to be playing Hamlet, someone with a vagina. Can I say that?
Yes, you can say anything you want.
Yeah. So I had been in a play. So I'm also an actor. So I act and I write and I direct and I'm sometimes a journalist and I do a number of different things. And when I was younger, doing different things used to worry me. I used to think I just wasn't serious enough or focused enough on anything, and I'd better pick one lane and stay in there. And then as the more I did, a couple of things emerged. I thought, one, if I'm actually going to be in the arts and live on the East Coast, and I'm able to do more than one thing, I must do more than one thing just to survive. Yeah. I think in a big city you can specialize. Here you've got to find a number of ways to pay the light bill. Yeah. And then the other thing, to be able to, the consistent thing for me is story, right? So whether I'm telling stories as a director or a writer or an actor or as a journalist, the North Star that is always staying still, that I follow is story. And actually, the opportunity to be able to tell story from different perspectives, actor, writer, or whatever, it all informs every other job I have in story. It's really useful. It's very useful to have an experience acting when you're then back in the writing room and going, right, I have to actually make dialogue that someone can actually say that makes sense, things like that. Yeah. So I had been in a play about 3 years ago called Pillow Man by Martin Mcdonagh, and I had played a writer who was captured by the police in a totalitarian state. It's a great play if you don't know it. And I had done that with 4 other people. We'd slapped that up as a collective and we had produced it ourselves. We essentially were a director and 4 actors who wanted to do an awesome play, and so we just made it happen. And a director that I know, Ken Schwartz, who's the co-artistic director of Two Planks and a Passion, that's a theater company here in Nova Scotia, and he and his wife, Chris O'Neill, have actually built over 25 years, the Ross Creek Arts Center for the Arts, which is in Canning, down in the valley in Nova Scotia. And if you haven't been there, you should totally go there. It's a beautiful place on this mountaintop, and it is devoted to all sorts of artistic disciplines. And there's camps being done there, and you have arts residencies. And Ken and Chris are two creative, kind, generous people who've just built this amazing thing out of $2 and a prayer, like we all do in the arts, right? And so he had come to see Pillow Man, and he wanted to do, I think, a production in town, because normally his productions are out on the mountaintop in Canning. And I think he was inspired by this kind of dirty indie urban collective we'd thrown up, and he asked me if I would like to basically co-produce a production of Hamlet, and he would direct and I would play Hamlet. And I had never done Shakespeare and had never thought about really playing Hamlet. And of course I said yes, who would ever say no? And but that meant we had to build the house, right? I wasn't just being cast, we had to build that house. And so what that meant was 4 years of collecting the money, Indiegogo campaigns, filling out grants, and so on. And then we finally got all our ducks in a row, and we had a venue planned. And then that venue, I know you know this, we have such a dearth of spaces for artists of all kinds in the city to do anything in. It's a huge problem. Affordable spaces. And then Jeremy Webb of Neptune actually stepped in and said, I want to give you guys a home. Wow. Which was amazing for us. The support of Neptune was amazing. They also, we were part of their family. We were on their website. Their additional publicity, all of those things helped us. So
the photos in the coast were great.
Oh, Corey Eisner, who's a photographer in the province here, and also a musician. He's an awesome guy. He came out we were rehearsing just before Christmas in December. We were rehearsing Hamlet at the Ross Creek Arts Centre. They have this big, amazing space we could rehearse in. And so we were working on death and revenge and betrayal just before Christmas, which was pretty odd and awesome. And he's a great photographer, and he came out and immediately worked with us on some of our ideas and took these great photos. And then Tara Thorne wrote this wonderful piece for us. We had no idea we were going to be on the cover. It was amazing to be on the cover because we were putting on a long classic tragedy in January. And we thought, no one's going to come. And we did great. We had great houses. And the thing that was also really exciting was that, man, I saw people at that theater I'd never seen out of the theater before. All sorts of different age demographics, all sorts of people that don't normally go. And this concept of Hamlet involved having the audience on the stage. So Ken, the director, has been for years now kind of exploring about blurring the line between audience and actor. And originally we wanted to do this production in an Edwardian house, and we would do it in a dining room. And so everyone would be a very small audience, and basically everyone would be in the set. But we couldn't make that happen. And when we went to Neptune, we thought, okay, so we'll have some of the audience in the regular audience part, but then we'll have other audience members on the stage with us. And we had this long table. It was like 16 feet long. And so some of the audience were literally seated around this table. And during the monologues, actually became scene partners. Like there was a couple of people who had monologues, but I had the most monologues. In fact, I joked that one of the taglines for the show should be, Hamlet, am I still yakking? And so we had audience members seated around this table, and that was Ken's concept. And originally, Israel, oh my God, the idea of this scared me so much. I was scared shitless to be playing Hamlet. I was scared shitless to be doing Shakespeare. And I was scared shitless with this notion of the audience literally around me. Because when you're on stage, the distance can be nice and helpful. You're out there in the dark. I actually can't even see you with the lights, right? But now you're this close to me. And also it requires... the acting it almost requires television acting and stage acting, because the audience is very far away on one level and very close on another level. So it was a huge creative challenge, which was interesting. And anyway, so initially I was really scared because I thought, I don't know what anyone's going to do. Someone might speak back to me. Someone might reject me. I just don't know what they're going to do. And then one of the actors who was in the play, Burgundy Code, who played Claudius, who was an exceptional Claudius. The cast was great people who did great creative work, and also were just great people to have in the room. And we can talk if you want about the alchemy of collaboration. But so she said to me, you should, if you hate this, if this scares you, you better find a way to love it and fast. And she was so right. So I basically it's that Mary Kay makeup philosophy of fake it till you make it. So I just lied to myself and said, you love the audience around you. You love seeing them there. And within a very short time, it actually was true. I did come to love the audience around the table. And they were different every night, of course, and sometimes you'd be looking in the face of someone really old. And actually, one of my favorite shows, we did a Saturday matinee, and a group of children who live in a boarding house came, and the entire table, I had children from 7 to 14 around the table, and I'm looking in tiny faces, and I'm delivering to be or not to be to them, and they're with me, they're following, they're nodding, we're having a conversation in a way.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. For
Yeah,
sure.
no, I mean, I remember you telling me about that, and I'm thinking, how is that? But, you had a wonderful experience. So now, let's go to Radical Age, because I remember asking you about the t-shirt, and you told me she's with the lady in the film.
Yes, that's right. So Radical Age is a feature documentary I did this year for Telltale Productions. So outside of my company, Peep Media, I've done two documentary films for Telltale. The first one was Free Reins, about a woman who runs a therapeutic horse farm, and near Mahone Bay. Patty McGill, she does incredible work, and the families that come there have all sorts of different communication disorders. And then after I did that film for Telltale, they asked me to do another, which was great because I enjoy working with and for them. And again, the idea was Erin Oakes, this producer who works there, and she said, I've come up with this idea. I want to look at 6 different people, who are supposed to be, I guess, senior citizens between the ages of like 58 and 85. And they're all involved in youth subcultures or activities that I guess are supposed to be seen to be the domain of younger people.
Yeah.
And so one was a 60-something-year-old skateboarder who had just taken up the sport a few years ago. One was an 85-year-old woman who a few years previous had started tattooing herself and now is quite covered. Another was a man near 60 who's a hip-hop dancer. There's also a 70-year-old mixed martial arts fighter, the oldest female mixed martial arts fighter in the world.
She's scary, that lady.
Yeah,
I will
she's tough.
hit you down. Yeah.
She's truly radical. And who am I leaving out? There was Zilla, the punk singer. And so I got to fly to a bunch of different places.
That was a cool job, actually.
Which was so cool.
Kevin
Fraser, the cinematographer who's done cinematography for every documentary I've done up to this point. He's an amazing person.
I love working with him.
He's wonderful.
Any
yes,
excuse,
he did Drown the Lovers.
exactly.
Yeah.
Any excuse to work with him. So
yes,
while he was
enough.
shooting Radical Age, we were starting to do prep for Drown the Lovers,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So whenever I'd come back, he'd be like, "Yeah, I just came back from England." I'm like, fuck are you doing? And like, yeah, I just came up from, but that was a cool job.
Yeah, that was a cool job. So essentially, we got to go to California and Chicago and Colorado and Ottawa and London.
Yeah.
And we went to London to spend some time with a woman called Zilla Minx, who's a punk singer of a band called Rubella Ballet, and she has sung in that band for about 40 years, so since she was a teenager. And she and her partner Sid, who used to play the drums, who now plays the guitar, he is also in that band. And Zilla actually I had a lot of affinity with because she talked a lot about how punk was a do-it-yourself movement. In fact, for them to find any space to play back in the day, and now like you build it yourself, right? And here on the East Coast, if we're in the arts, we have to build it ourselves.
You have no choice.
You have no choice. So one of the things that she had also done on her own was make her own documentary, which I'm wearing a shirt of, called She's a Punk Rocker, and it's examining the role of women in punk. So all those people I got to meet through Radical Age were really interesting.
So is it done now?
Unique, eccentric people. It's done now. We shot and we prepped, shot, and posted that film in a year.
What?
And actually less than a year. And yeah, it just about killed me. But in fact, so we started shooting we only started shooting last December. We shot till February. Then I had to write. Then we started editing last summer with Sarah Byrne. If we're giving shout outs to people, Sarah Byrne, amazing editor.
Yeah.
Kevin Fraser, amazing cinematographer. And James O'Toole has also done sound on a lot of my documentaries. So Sarah and I edited that thing through the summer and into the fall. And then I had 5 days in between when Radical Age was finally done and Hamlet began. And
how did you do that? No, okay, I'm sorry. No, how did you do that?
well, I felt really tired, but essentially during the as we were getting through the final stages of post for Radical Age, I was memorizing iambic pentameter because we only had 2.5 weeks rehearsal for Hamlet.
What?
And I don't know if you've heard, but it's a rather long piece.
2.5 weeks.
Yeah, so I had to, as most actors do these days now, actually, I had to go in with stuff memorized, or we would never. We didn't have time in rehearsal for me to also be
get all that,
getting the text underneath my belt. So, so for Hamlet, we had to hit the ground running. So I must say, during the run of Hamlet, I have a lot of energy, but during the run of Hamlet, when we got that show up on its feet, like essentially I would do the show, for that day. Sometimes if we had a matinee, I would do 2 shows in a day, and it was almost 3 hours each run, right? And then I felt like Celine Dion. I was just home resting, trying to get my energy up to go back and do it all again,
Oh man. So Radical Age, is it gonna be broadcast or?
Well, it has already been broadcast. It was done for the Vision channel. And I think Aaron is trying to find out if there will ever be any plans for it to be online. I hope so. Most things are online these days. It would be great if it did go online.
Yeah, that's a cool one. And so what's the process now? You get an interesting story. Actually, you get an interesting story or person, and there's something about the person that pulls you, and you feel, okay, this is a story you need to talk about, share, all that. How do you decide this is it? This is the one? I mean, you must get a few stories by now, but then how do you decide which one to dig in?
Well, there's got to be all the signposts of a story there. There's got to be, even in documentary, there's got to be an inciting incident. There's got to be rising action. There's got to be a journey that happens. So, and then it's got to be usually a person or subject that intrigues me, like with Bernie Langille. He's someone whose whole family has been affected by this, as I said before, this dark family fable. It's shaped, he talks about how it's shaped his father and it's shaped his uncles and it's shaped him, and he was never even present for the original event and never met the person that he's named after who it happened to. So things can be passed down to us generationally, that we're looking now very much in the mainstream. It's finally entering the consciousness of this idea of intergenerational trauma, right?
Yeah.
That can happen in individual families, can happen collectively to cultures.
Yeah.
First Nations in Canada, we're examining the effects of intergenerational trauma. So I certainly had an affinity with Bernie in the sense of my parents died when I was a really young child, and there was kind of no one around to tell me the story of me. So I kind of, my own life of finding out my own identity has been like searching in the dark and coming across pieces here and there and trying to fit the pieces together to figure out where you came from. Yeah. Well, that's sort of kind of what's going on there for Bernie, So usually there kind of has to be an affinity in some way or a question I'm trying to figure out. What I'd really like to do now is I really want to write a screenplay. I really want to write a fiction screenplay. And I've been lucky enough to do documentary, and I've been given opportunity there, in part because I'm a female and we're often more thrown a bone in the world of documentary because the money's less, right? But I do come from the world of fiction, and I very much, I have written, I wrote a short film about 10 years ago about a fetus in a jar. And
wait, you're not just... Okay, well, definitely now you have to come back to talk about the fetus in the jar story.
Yeah.
But
Well, that
we'll
was a
leave
while
that.
ago. But anyway,
Yeah.
so that's what. So basically, I'm going to be working on making Bernie a feature. I do a play out at Two Planks this summer, which is an adaptation of The Trojan Women by a young contemporary Nova Scotian playwright called Gillian Clark. So I'm really interested in doing that, and I'm also trying to carve out time so I can get a screenplay done for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna end it with this. You do all these things you do. How do you make time for yourself?
Well, that is a question on my mind these days, because I know, when work comes, it's either feast or famine, isn't it? And it's so difficult to say no to work, and you fear, oh my God, if I say no to you, you'll never call me again. And so I do need a bit more balance in my life these days. I'm really feeling that quite acutely, because part of being creative, all fields need a fallow period of time, right?
Yeah.
Where they just gotta sit and do nothing, and then the next thing that happens is the wildflower seeds and stuff like that can grow, and then after that you can plant a crop, right? But that periods of idleness, and then periods of the wildflower period where it's just playtime and thinking time and dreaming and scheming time. All that is imperative to being able to be creative. So I'm just trying to figure out myself how I can do more of that. And we also live in a world where we're on 24/7 all the time. People I'm guilty of this, send work emails on the weekend, and so, in the evenings. And so 2019, I am trying to carve out more boundaries on that stuff, more of a balance on that stuff, and get the play dreaming time in more, for sure.
Sweet. Super grateful you came in today, and I have even more questions now, so I'm definitely gonna have you come back.
Oh, that's so nice.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Thanks, Israel. Great to talk to you. Also, this idea for a podcast is awesome. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
This is the Blackout Podcast. Thanks for listening.